The Psychedelic Integration Coach and PsychedeLiA, Psychedelic Experience Integration, are a collective of professionals and peers interested in the potential psychological and spiritual healing properties of psychedelics. Our events are intended for the purpose of educating about mindful and safe integration of entheogenic experiences, offering emotional support, and creating meaningful connections between community members. Find more information at www.psychedelicintegrationcoach.com/events, and may you live that psychedelic feeling. Let's begin the workshop on the topic of letting go, practical techniques for effective ego transcendence through the entheogenic experience. A little bit on Merrill's bio. Merrill Ward is a staunch proponent of cognitive liberty and a passionate advocate for the safe and responsible use of entheogens for engendering direct spiritual experience. He possesses the rare gift of exquisitely articulating deep esoteric wisdom and transmitting this wisdom through ceremony, ontology, metaphor, and noetic experience. Merrill has been deeply involved in the Western mystery school tradition and comparative world religions for over 28 years. He's an ordained Gnostic priest, ritualist, teacher, and student of the spiritual philosophies of Thelema, and Hermeticism, as well as the disciplines of transpersonal alchemy, Raja Yoga, Hermetic Kabbalah, and ceremonial magic, with a special emphasis on the mystical, unitive experience and the practical application and uses of entheogenic techniques and sacraments for exploring and expanding human consciousness for attaining direct access to the divine. Again? That was a long paragraph. His work over the past 11 years acts as a transformative catalyst, effectively guiding individuals and groups into deeply profound states of unitive consciousness, providing them with a richer and deeper integrated understanding of their innate power, love, wisdom, creativity, and spiritual abilities, while aligning them with their true will, purpose, and mission in life. Merrill has offered presentations and spoken on entheogenic spirituality around the world and is a conscious and loving father.
Thank God you didn't read every single place that I spoke.
Let's welcome Merrill Ward, please.
I wrote that introduction. It's hard listening to it come back, but I will say it's still shorter than Stan Groff's. I want to thank Cherie, Malcolm Gadassi, for just making this happen. Joelle, I want to thank you too for everything you guys did for making this easy for me to be here. Thank you all for showing up tonight. I'm hoping we will have an enjoyable ride. Please keep your hands and arms inside the room at all times, and I pretty much can guarantee that nobody will get hurt. What I'd like to do to start is just to set a little container, if you would indulge me, and close your eyes for a moment. And let's take a nice full breath in together. And let it out. As we offer up our thanks and abiding gratitude to that infinite and eternal source of all existence and creation, for the continually unfolding gift that is this one precious life, for affording us yet another opportunity to come together on this night in sacred communion and connection with self, with that source, and with each other. Aho. I love saying aho because it really pisses James Orrock off. So it's great to be here. I grew up in Los Angeles, and in fact, not too far away from here, probably about 15 miles down the road in Redondo Beach, Torrance, and the environs of the South Bay. I have a very interested, checkered past that came up through the punk rock music scene in LA. So glad to see my friend Elliot here, who I haven't seen in decades, who participated with me in some of that brouhaha. And my life has taken quite a few interesting turns over the years. And needless to say, I never really expected to be in the particular position that I am now, but just really happy to be here. My life keeps unfolding in the most dynamic ways, and I owe some of that to my work with Entheogens. And so tonight I'm going to be working from a talk that I gave last year in 2018 at the Exploring Psychedelics Conference in Ashland, Oregon, where I live, which is kind of a big center for entheogenic activity. And I want to recognize and honor and thank my dear friend and ally, Rak Razam, for some of the thoughts and ideas that he and I have shared together that have influenced some of what I will be sharing with you tonight. And again, thank you all for showing up. So as I go through this was about a 30-minute presentation. And I'm really going to slow way down. And I want to ask that if, even though we're going to have Q&A, I always say that if the only dumb question is the one that goes unasked. So, and I kind of will warn you guys right now, I do attempt, and sometimes feebly so, to use humor in my process. So if it's not very funny, if you could just kind of chuckle from time to time, thanks. It makes me feel a whole lot better. So let's get to it. Last year, in 2017, my talk at Exploring Psychedelics was called Holding Space, Creating and Crafting Effective Containers and Techniques for Holding Sacred Ceremony with Psychedelics and Entheogenic Sacraments. So my history, as Cherie talked about, is in the Western mystery school tradition. Again, primarily the disciplines of Raja Yoga, ceremonial magic, Hermetic Kabbalah, and transpersonal alchemy. And so I have tended to utilize techniques that utilize aspects of ceremonial magic and alchemy to really frame sacred ceremony. And this has been, let's just call it, an incredibly effective tool in this process. And that particular talk primarily focused on best practices around the ideas of creating containers for both practitioners and participants when working with these powerful catalysts for transformation, primarily entheogens. And do I need to explain what entheogens are? Everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say entheogen?
Just do it quick.
Excellent. What's that?
Just do it real quick.
Okay. I'll do it really quick. So entheogen is of Greek origin. It's a neologism. It's a new word primarily come up with by Carl Ruck and Jonathan Ott, and a number of people who had felt that the word psychedelics had fallen into disuse. So entheo from the Greek, en is within, theo, God, and gen from genestai, or genesis, to generate the God within. And so these are either practices or sacred substances that can be used to literally generate this experience of the God within. And in my research, really over the last, close to 28 years, pretty much going on 29 years, my interest has been what I term the mystical unitive experience, what Johns Hopkins more recently has called the complete mystical experience, also known as the acute mystical experience. Now, this experience has been called many, many things throughout history. It's been called by the yogins samadhi. Specifically, if we're talking about 5-MeO-DMT, nirvikalpa samadhi. So samadhi is a Sanskrit word. Sam means with, and adi means God. Nirvikalpa means beyond freaking any kind of description whatsoever. It's called satori. It's called nirvana. The Vajrayana Buddhists call it rigpa. It's pleroma is what the Greeks called it, the fullness of all existence, Bodhi mind, God consciousness, Christ consciousness, call it whatever you will. It is that universal ground of being that has been called many, many things throughout recorded history. And so tonight, I'm going to be looking at things from a slightly different angle, because in my last talk in Holding Space, it was primarily focused on the contextualization or framing of ceremony and ideas of set and setting, and specifically tips for integration, although I'm going to probably be talking a little bit about integrative techniques when we get through. And basically, the Q&A that we're going to do at the end, even though I want to encourage you to ask questions as I go, we're going to entitle that Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About 5-MeO-DMT, but were afraid to ask. Be very afraid. So tonight, my talk is entitled, it's right there, Letting Go, Practical Techniques for Effective Ego Transcendence Through the Entheogenic Experience. Did I tell you I had a marketing background too? And it's offered more or less from the perspective of what the individual participant can do in their process of releasing or surrendering fully into this entheogenic experience, whether brought on by some kind of psychedelic or some kind of entheogen, or by a particular practice. For example, Raja Yoga, and I've got my good friend Raja Yogi Joel Briere here, and can verify this. You know, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the entire process is geared towards giving the person the experience of the full let go in a nirvikalpa samadhi. And it involves techniques of breathing and focused concentration, the whole 8 limbs of yoga. It's not just about physical posturing. Asana, or physical posture, is just about one aspect. We're really talking about a series of things that one can do to cultivate that experience within one's own consciousness, not necessarily with substances. Mantak Chia talks a lot about light deprivation exercises, for example, of going into pitch black caves. And after 2 or 3 days, it is, again, speculated that the pineal gland begins producing small flushes of melatonin, sending people into deep dream-related sleep. After several more days, it supposedly starts producing NN-DMT, and then supposedly after long periods of time, I know I have Jackaloka in the room who's probably looking at me going like, that's not true, that's not been proven yet. But the theory is that it then starts producing 5-MeO-DMT and people go into these full states of God consciousness. So I'm just saying these are speculative things that are put out there, so we know that there are disciplines that people do for generating these states that don't necessarily involve using not exogenous medicines. So just to be clear. Let's see, where am I going? So we're talking about this idea of the full entheogenic release as it relates specifically to the most powerful entheogen that we are aware of at this time, or at least what I'm most aware of, which is 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine, or 5-MeO-DMT. How many people are familiar with 5-MeO-DMT in the room? Yeah, well, it's getting more popular, especially with Michael Pollan's new book, How to Change Your Mind. I just saw Pollan's interview with Joe Rogan, and Pollan did not have a good experience with 5-MeO-DMT. In fact, he said it was absolutely terrifying. But then he goes on to start talking about, then I came back into my body and I realized I was actually Michael Pollan again and in a body, and I was just so fucking grateful for that. I think it was a good experience. And then if you're listening really closely, there's podcasts of Mike Tyson just doing 5-MeO-DMT, which is a little bit frightening, and yet, yeah, there you go. So, the energetic expansion of consciousness encountered through what has been termed a full release into the totality of the entheogenic experience, or what I like to call a transrational fractal holographic expansion into the everything nothing all at once forever right now, can be immensely opening and inspiring and simultaneously daunting and terrifying for many individuals, as we saw with Mr. Pollan. especially perhaps for those encountering this experience for the very first time. Now, Poland is saying, I don't need to do that again. You know, and to do 5-MeO-DMT a second time is always a heroic act. I have heard of many people talking about going and doing 5-MeO a second time and said, oh my God, I'm so much more scared than I was the first time. Well, that's because the ego knows what's coming. You know, and so, and subsequently there are people that I have heard of who have done 5-MeO-DMT on many occasions, and that nervousness ahead of time is not something that is uncommon. In fact, I know people who've done it many, many times who are still nervous in that process. And again, it is literally because our egoic construct, which I'm going to talk about what that is in just a minute, knows that it's going to be taken offline. You know, it's what's been called by neurophysiologists, you know, neurobiologists. I mean, what would the word be, Jack? What are you? What? Neurophysicist. Yeah, there it is. A neurophysician would call that. There you go. Would call that egoic structure the default mode network. That's the term you hear a lot. And I don't think anybody's really realized yet that if you take those letters, default, D-E, mode, M-O, network, N, right, it's your demon. It is the demon that lives inside of you. It's that one that whispers all those things that, you know, create all the judgments in your consciousness. And I don't think anybody who's really talking about the default mode network has even noticed that yet. So let's see. Yet, even experienced psychonauts or practitioners with years of experience with other potent psychedelic sacraments may face challenges in the process of letting go of the dissolving egoic structure in the face of the sheer magnitude of a full entheogenic encounter. So tonight, I want to offer just a brief overview and examine a few very effective techniques in preparing for and maximizing one's ability to fully surrender into this dynamic, transformative experience. And again, hopefully we'll have several minutes for some Q&A at the end. And one of the things that I want to talk about, you know, before I roll in is harm reduction is a big topic within the psychedelic and entheogenic community, but only very recently have people been starting to talk about what I like to call benefit enhancement. And so harm reduction has a tendency to be a reactive state. Somebody's taking something in an environment they didn't expect, they're taking too much, something's occurring that they weren't expecting, and therefore they need assistance in that process of integration, especially if it's happening at a festival. And the work that Zendo and other integration therapists are doing in bringing harm reduction forward is so very, very important. But on the other side of that is what I like to term, and the term's starting to come into the vernacular more, is benefit enhancement. And benefit enhancement is a proactive way in dealing with psychedelics and psychoactives, where you're looking at front-loading all of the positive effects and really examining, okay, what is it that I'm getting into, in order to provide all of the information necessary up front so you don't need harm reduction on the back end. Everybody get that? Yeah. Awesome. So we're looking at the benefit enhancement. And so my other talk, Holding Space, which I also gave at the AWARE project last year, as well as 2 years ago at Exploring Psychedelics, that's online, and I highly recommend people checking that out to give that framing context. And again, here we're looking at it from the other angle. So, first and foremost, let us ask ourselves, what the fuck is the human ego anyway? Well, I'll posit that our human ego is merely a psychic construct. It is a limiter or a control valve of consciousness generated by us collectively as source or God or whatever term least triggers you in order to really do one thing and one thing only: to simply create the experience of distinction and separation. And I am not talking about the esoteric illusion of separation. I'm talking about real, freaking live separation, which is an amazing thing. Pollan recognized it when he came back. Oh, I'm actually Michael Pollan now. How awesome. So specifically, in creating separation so that source itself can experience itself in physical reality and occupy these amazing human vehicles of our human bodies, right? In a sense, the ego allows a certain amount of consciousness in and a certain amount of consciousness out of the psyche. And when that limiter is fully opened or dissolved, all consciousness flows in, all consciousness flows out, and we experience right here and right now the infinite and eternal source of all existence and creation, whether you want to call it Advaita, non-dual consciousness. And what we are experiencing right here and right now is just a limited perspective of temporal reality. But that temporal reality is just as real as what I like to refer to as the ultimate reality, as that full Godhead. So there's a tendency for people to diminish mundane existence. And I got to tell you right now, mundane existence, it's a fucking miracle. We are source consciousness embodied in human physical flesh suits that can do all sorts of really fucking cool things that source can't, because it needs us in order to function in temporal time and space. Everybody get that? Awesome. And the ego is an absolute necessary function of the human condition. It's what allows us to be us, fully human. And there is nothing really wrong at all with the human ego per se, except for the fact that many individuals are effectively out of right relation with the ego. And who may believe that the ego is really all there is, because frankly, they have essentially lived their entire lives from within the confines of that particular limited perspective. Now, personally, I believe that the ego is a precious gift generated by Source so that it can effectively experience itself as other, so it can more perfectly love itself within the temporal physical realm, something that the majority of humanity has somehow simply forgotten. They have fallen asleep to it. Yet, we are now in the very process of remembering and reawakening. And a full release encounter with 5-MeO allows us to experience the fullness of that ultimate reality, which exists beyond the egoic structure and is the fullest expression of love, which is the unencumbered energy of Source expressing itself fully into physical reality. So, if we're going to effectively dissolve the egoic structure, it's really important to have a better understanding of what it is and how it works. And I will posit that the ego essentially provides us with 4 key distinctions, and it has 1 prime directive. If you want to take notes, get ready. Those 4 key distinctions are position, perspective, individuality, and identity. So, first and foremost, the ego allows us to establish a sense of position within the nexus of temporal reality of both space and time, which, by its very definition, is a temporary state. Right now, it is our egoic consciousness that is telling us that we are sitting right here in Evos, Venice, California, United States, planet Earth, solar system, Milky Way, cosmos, right? And it's also generating a collective agreement about what we generally refer to as time. Because once you get off the planet, no more minutes, no more hours, no more days, weeks, and months. It's all just space. Which basically is another construct that exists so we can all arrive at a generally agreed upon coordinates in order to see a really wonderful speaker, or that we are most interested in, and to keep the show running and on schedule for the most part. So these relative ideas of time, again, are these terrestrial constructs. And in the entheogenic experience, all of that construct completely dissolves away and loses their relevance. So when the ego dissolves within the entheogenic experience, so does time and space, creating the perceived recognition of both eternity and infinity, because that is what's really going on always, all the time. It's merely our ego that prevents us from experiencing that all the time, thank God. Secondly, the ego provides us with a sense of perspective. Through our visions and through our organs of sense, our various organs of sense, our ego is constantly making distinctions and differentiations between things. It is seeing everything in this room, distinguishing between the furnishings, the screen behind me, the decorations here, the floor, the walls, the ceiling, inside and outside. And likely, most importantly, it is making distinctions between each other, which is the next thing that the ego effectively provides us with, a sense of individuation, of being a separate and distinct individual, whole and complete, separate and distinct from other individuals. And finally, it provides us with our sense of identity, that sense of self, based on a whole variety of things, including the location and circumstances of our birth, for example, the name we received at birth, how we were raised by our parents, how we were educated, how we've been indoctrinated over time, how we've liberated ourselves from those indoctrinations, and all of the various relationships we have, how much we identify with what we do in our careers, what we do in our lives. If we go to Burning Man, it's our playa name as a subset of our personality, if you will. All of these associations come together to form our image of ourselves and who we believe ourselves to be. And one final aspect of identity is that it's a protective mechanism. If I dropped something really, really heavy on my foot, for example, it's my ego that recognizes that sensation. It then recognizes the location of the sensation, foot. It then identifies with that location as that's my fucking foot, and then it reacts or responds accordingly. So the 5-MeO experience fully dissolves all of these things away, allowing us to experience that which exists beyond the fluctuations of temporal, rational, egoic mind, to dissolve back into the infinite and eternal source of all that is. Oh, I talked about the prime directive. Do you know what the prime directive of the ego is? To stay intact at all fucking costs. Because the ego is absolutely convinced that it's running the whole show. And it's really not. And so the trouble that we get into in our lives is when our ego is grasping onto something and it's holding on to it, and that may not be the reality of what is. And so the ego gets really, really stressed out when it's not going the way that it wants to, when all it really needs to do is just that, let go. And that's what our talk's about. And so let's see where we're going here. So this amazing molecule, 5-MeO-DMT, that exists naturally and endogenously inside of all mammals, it exists inside of all humans, it's found in plants ubiquitously throughout the world, and then surprisingly enough, it is also found within the bufotoxin of the Sonoran desert toad, the Colorado River toad, or Bufo alvarius. Has this innate ability to induce this most profound revelation that I'm talking about. And so now that we have some ideas about the ego and what it provides us, what are some of the techniques to assist us in transcending it through the entheogenic experience? So next we need to ask ourselves, what do we really mean by letting go into the entheogenic encounter? So now is the participation part of our ceremony, and I'd like everybody to stand up on your feet. Because what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate what letting go feels like. So, everybody raise your arms, and you're going to grasp onto an invisible trapeze bar above your head. Right? You're holding onto this trapeze bar, right? And you're looking down. You're looking down, and what you're seeing is an infinite drop into clouds. So every single ounce of your ego is telling you to hold the fuck on, that you are not going to let go. So you're holding on to that trapeze bar, and you're pretty sure that if you let go, it's certain death, right? So notice, go ahead and put your fists, like really clench your fists around that bar. So you're really feeling it. So that clenching, that requires effort. Letting go does not require effort. It merely requires a choice. So I want you to take a big breath in and open your hands. You're falling. Now you're falling really, really fast. You're scared and you're falling and you're looking down as the clouds are coming up. And then the clouds come up and you're in the clouds and you can't see anything. And then you pass through the clouds and there is no bottom here. So this is no longer falling. Put your arms out to the side. This is flying. And then it's just a matter of getting your navigational sense about you. So everybody get that in your body, feeling that gripping, and that just a choice. Boom, it's right there. Okay, you can sit down. That made me feel better. I sure hope it made you feel better. So let's see where we are. So I will hold that letting go or surrendering is simply a process of fully relaxing into the energetic expansion of the entheogenic experience. And letting go actually requires no effort. It is a process of non-doing. It is merely a choice to offer no resistance to what is unfolding. And this process of surrendering cannot be forced or coerced, as some practitioners who you may see on videos may think they actually can do. Not recommended. Don't try this at home. So the full surrender must be fully allowed. It must be embraced by and with the full consent of the individual who is surrendering. And that consent has to be given way the hell before somebody does any kind of psychoactive, and in my personal opinion, needs to come with a full explanation of what the effects of that particular sacrament might do. And I can tell you this, you can talk about the effects of 5-MeO-DMT to somebody for fucking hours, and nothing you're gonna tell them is really gonna prepare them for it. But you can sure try really, really hard. So this process has to be a conscious and enthusiastic willing or offering up of the ego itself. It's what I like to call accept nothing less than a full fuck yes, which can be challenging for some. In this process, the individual may come up against the resistance or fear that may prevent the ego from fully surrendering and letting go. So what can we do in preparation what can we do in preparation for this release to mitigate these potential resistances? Well, I will hold, there are several. Likely, the first step is developing trust. A profound sense of trust must be established before surrender can really take place. If you do not trust your practitioner, there is no way you're going to be able to release. So if you run into a practitioner and you're not feeling that you can trust them, walk away. A deep trust in oneself, a trust in the inherent love of Source, and especially a trust between the individual and whoever they are entrusting with the care of their physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual well-being while moving through and releasing into this process. And that, my friends, can be a really, really big ask for anybody. Intention is yet another important aspect of this process. So 5-MeO-DMT can reduce or temporarily dissolve the sense of egoic identity, separating us from the unitive truth that lies within. In a full release, all sense of ego and intention will likely dissolve completely, and yet intentionality can help prepare us for the opening into this profound truth. Setting a personal and or group intention can provide focus and entrain the consciousness and assist to program the conscious mind going into or returning from what we refer to as the peak experience. Intentions should be carefully considered and crafted before a ceremony or session, and these intentions should be clear within our mind. Some may even wish to write down that intention in a very, very succinct manner beforehand, and then hold that intention lightly and be prepared to surrender that intention if and as necessary in order to be completely present and open to what actually shows up for you in the experience. And a huge aspect of intention is simply making that choice to let go. Everybody got that? Beautiful. So relaxation is absolutely key in that process. So one must be able to fully relax into this process in order to do so. And the individual must be given total permission to fully express whatever is necessary and essential in their experience of opening and awakening, what has commonly been called full catharsis. So 5-MeO-DMT can really induce a full sense of catharsis. But in order for that full catharsis to be able to release, that individual's got to be given absolute permission. So whether you're working in a group setting or in a one-on-one setting, between you and the practitioner or you and the group that you're involved with, everybody's got to be in complete agreement that no matter what unfolds, we are going to hold absolute rock solid space for the individual so they can fully express without needing to know, without thinking that they might get hurt, without thinking they might get judged, whatever that may be. And so, it's what I call establishing a permissionary position. And so that it's really true, is that we want to give people that full permission to do that fullest expression possible. Let's see where we are. They can rage, scream, cry, laugh, orgasm, move, purge, release, whatever is required that needs to be released without shame, fear, guilt, or judgment, because everything that comes up is for their healing, for their coming into wholeness. And a solid facilitator should accept that without qualm or reaction or attachment, without reinforcing or denying, to radically accept with non-judgment and absolutely no shaming in the process, which is absolutely imperative. Everybody got that? Because the 5-MeO experience, so much can come up. In his book, The Entheogenic Evolution, by my really, really dear friend, Martin Ball, Martin describes a number of things that he calls the types of experience, what I've come to call archetypal presentments. And so different people present in different ways. And some people present as Buddhas. They're completely still, totally silent. They don't move a muscle. They usually take the medicine in. They have a huge smile that spreads across their face. They usually say something like, "Oh my God." And then they're absolutely still and quiet for 35, 40 minutes, and then they usually sit up with absolute love radiating from their eyes. And they usually do a full pranam bow to everyone in the room, and then they say something like, "Oh my God, that was the most incredible experience of my life. I love you all." And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have what we've called primal screamers and cosmic infants, right? So primal screamers, they don't need a whole lot of explanation. They scream and they're primal. And sometimes they scream really fucking loud and for a really, really long time. And sometimes that screaming sounds like the best darn orgasm you've ever heard anybody have. And sometimes it sounds like sheer and abject terror. But it's interesting because if you sit with those people for a little while, kind of when they come back in, you can turn to them and you go, "Wow, that was some intense primal screaming you were doing." Almost always they'll say something like, I was screaming? No way. They will have no recollection of it whatsoever. And so you want to be able to give full expression to that, because this may be something you've been carrying around with you for a long, long time, and it needs to come up and out. It can come up and out in purging. You know, sometimes in the 5-MeO-DMT experience, ego dissolves away, and the unrestricted primal libido rises right up out of the subconscious, and it wants to express itself fully because it has never had the opportunity to really do that before. So that can result in all sorts of very, very sensual expressions, sometimes sexual expressions. We have heard of individuals, men and women, having complete ejaculatory orgasms under this state. And if somebody goes into something like that, you got to be holding absolute mature space for that, because the idea of shaming can come up and that can then cause trauma. But we, it is, I've heard from many, many psychotherapists, depth psychologists, transpersonal therapists who say, who have done this medicine and say that they get more out of one session with 5-MeO-DMT than 5 to 10 years of talk therapy, because they're actually accessing the psychic content. And they're able to come into relatedness with the particular trauma that they're dealing with. They can accept that trauma, they can embrace it, and then effectively release it. And we're going to look at some of the latest work from the Johns Hopkins studies at the end of this, so you can get an idea of that. So yet another vital aspect of this process of developing trust and the ability to let go is the establishment of clear boundaries and space holding. And individuals must be able to know with absolute certainty and deep trust that they will be safely held, honored, respected, protected, and cared for no matter what may be coming up for them in the process. Like I said, very sensitive things. So practitioners must do everything in their power to hold space for and positively influence the mindset of each participant in advance of, so that's the benefit enhancement, during and well after the session or ceremony. So there's been a lot of talk about certain 5-MeO practitioners that really just don't offer any kind of integrative support at all. They fly around the world, they pop people open, and then they're off to their next gig somewhere. And then supposedly their organizers are supposed to be there providing effective integration. And a lot of times those individuals are not qualified to do so. And so any practitioner working with 5-MeO-DMT should at least be able to provide a modicum of integrative support, or if not directly, should be able to provide enough written information and referrals to organizations like PsychedeLiA Integration, to places like the Aware Project, and to be able to come into community to at least have some kind of co-facilitated integration process. Because some people coming through that might require, you could stir stuff up in the psyche that may require psychotherapy and a good solid regimen of psychotherapy. So people have to be made aware in advance that that could be part of the package. So this includes practitioners reminding participants that they are merely facilitating the medicine experience, but they are not the medicine itself. Everything that occurs within a 5-MeO experience is part of the participant's own revelation of who and what they truly are, of source consciousness expressing itself within them. A skilled practitioner can assist in engendering an openness to the experience, but it is always the participant who is opening and remembering. The practitioner is not doing this to them, they are not doing it for them. And this is vital to both understand and represent. Egoic attachment, transference, projection, or entrainment onto a practitioner serves no one, and practitioners should be at pains to avoid engendering such attachments. Ethical protocols should be generated and adhered to by practitioners in regards to establishing appropriate boundaries in terms of potential romantic and or intimate relating with participants, and provides for an appropriate amount of integration time to occur before engaging in anything like that. Body positioning, this is a big one Martin Ball talks about, can be a crucial aspect of letting go. So there are many ways to receive 5-MeO-DMT, and each will likely have a varying effect on the experience. So there are some practitioners who want people to be fully standing up when they receive 5-MeO-DMT. I never quite get that one, because most of the time after they're administered, they're down on the ground and writhing in the dirt, which also doesn't seem like a very good place to be doing 5-MeO-DMT. Or in riverbeds, or by large fucking rocks, where you could potentially crack your skull open. Not a good set and setting for that, really. Let me see where I'm going. So certain practitioners may insist on the participant maintaining a very specific body position throughout their experience. Martin Ball calls it maintaining bilateral symmetry. So I've seen a couple people on 5-MeO-DMT, I'd say a couple. And I've seen people definitively totally outside of their egoic construct in anything but bilateral symmetry. This medicine can absolutely move you. James Orrock talks about, he goes, "Oh, I never like doing 5-MeO-DMT with anybody around because it like influences me, and I like go all around the room if people are around." But then Orrock says that if he does it by himself, he's like rock solid and stays like right where he is. But if people are around, he's all around the room. And people can definitely move a lot. They're called movers, and then you really got to hold space for movers, because you don't want anyone injuring themselves, and holding space for people, it's basically, especially in group environments, it's what we call full contact spirituality. And if you're holding space and somebody's like rolling up on you with arms flailing, legs kicking, you got to invoke your best Jedi Aikido skills in order not to take a blow, which is called taking one for the team. It rarely happens, but in the event that it does happen, you want to know that's going to happen. And so we want to make sure people know that they're going to be safe in that. Okay, so body positioning, that's one. 5-MeO can engender an enormous energetic opening that flows naturally through all of the body's circuits. Some participants may curl up or go into fetal position, exhibit signs of tetany or muscle contractions, or begin shaking or vibrating intensely as the energy is released, expressing Kundalini Shakti energy. They may try to hold on or otherwise attempt to escape or redirect the experience, something we call runners, who absolutely are convinced that if they can just get out of the room they're in, they'll be able to somehow escape the experience. And we're laughing, but so my mom, who died back in 2011, she was in hospice with my sister in Torrance. And she was having transient ischemic attacks, these mini strokes that built and built and built. And I saw her go into several of them, and it looked like she was absolutely going into a release state on 5-MeO-DMT. And and then my sister would kind of step in and go, "Mom, do you want a popsicle? Do you want a popsicle?" My mom did not want a popsicle, but nobody, until I kind of arrived, gave her permission to go, which she finally did. And so, and that, the 5-MeO experience is preparing us for that fullest release of all, which is the Grand Mort, the great death. Tom Pinkson calls this death practice medicine, because it is preparing us for the release. In the Eleusinian Mysteries, practiced for over 2,500 years in Greece, they would use kykeon, an ergotized barley beer, and they would sing songs of, "Blessed are they who have seen the mysteries, blessed are they, for they know the end of life, and they know its beginning," because they have transcended those boundaries of death. Where am I going? Certain practitioners recommend being open, keeping the limbs uncrossed to allow free energetic flow, which sometimes result into what has been referred to, I just mentioned it, as mirrored bilateral symmetry of their limbs, resulting in mudras, asanas, yogic poses, etc. Now, some participants may move or dance or experience free-flowing movement in their bodies. Some feel an overwhelming orgasmic burst, and some overflow into cathartic sound and release, including, as I mentioned, primal screaming, and may exhibit glossolalia, speaking in tongues. And these are all natural responses that should be honored and supported. Further, it can be immensely helpful to practice some form of breathing exercises before and after a 5-MeO-DMT session. Deep, unforced rhythmic breathing can greatly enhance and assist in the process of surrendering the ego. In training participants to be consciously aware of their breath and simply release everything which no longer serves with each exhalation. Various breathing methods can be utilized beforehand, such as a fourfold breathing, or breath of fire, or deep belly breathing. Yogic pranayama breath work works amazingly. And this can assist in opening the lungs and empowering the participant to be more conscious of their breath in general. This can assist to alleviate any egoic fears about their body stopping breathing while going into state, in addition to calming the nerves and energy of a participant both before, during, and after the experience. The two general rules with 5-MeO-DMT, just so everybody knows: surrender completely, remember to breathe. Nobody generally forgets to do number two, although we have heard of some people using techniques of, I don't know, blowing rapé up people's noses when they're fully in state, or pouring large copious quantities of water over people's faces and mouths, which can, some people have referred to it as entheogenic waterboarding. Really quite tragic, and as far as I know, has led to some deaths in the recent past. So those are techniques that do not need to be utilized to stimulate a breathing response. Some of the most easy ways, if somebody you find is not breathing in a 5-MeO-DMT experience, simply blow on their face. Rub your hand across their chest. Tap on their chest. The simple one is lay a hand over their navel. It almost always will result in them taking a big, deep breath into that experience. These other techniques, they are far too radical, far too dangerous, in my estimated opinion. Yes, question?
What would happen if you just set it in someone's ear?
Yeah, that's another good way. That's all you have to do, really all you have to do. Trying to keep standard linguistics out of the experience is a good thing, but sometimes people need a little bit of verbal coaching, a little bit of touch coaching, and sometimes, as long as it's explained beforehand. And that's a very, very simple one, just giving the person the permission to breathe. Checking my time, I'm doing well.
Doing great.
Awesome. During the activation itself, it is recommended to simply breathe deeply through the nose in an unforced manner. Practitioners should pay close attention to each participant's breathing throughout the experience. Simple techniques, I just said: blowing gently on the participant's face, rubbing the breastbone lightly with a closed fist, just placing the palm gently over the navel can offer subtle cues to the participant to take a breath should their breathing become compromised within the session. And again, I'm going to state it really clearly and just read it right out. Pouring water into the mouth, nose, or throat to instigate a breathing reflex is an extreme tool that should be avoided by more careful consideration of dosage and sensitivity of the participant. It can result in water in the lungs, causing aspiration and other more serious complications. And finally, it is not uncommon for the disintegrating ego to experience anxiety, nervousness, and fear, both in advance, during, and sometimes after the experience. And effectively, dealing with fear is a critical aspect of this entire process. So Carl Jung very aptly stated, "What we resist persists." And when it comes to facing our fear, no statement could be closer to the truth. The sense of ego dissolution can generate fear within the disintegrating ego. And certain individuals may even experience this as feeling like they are actually physically dying, or in some cases being totally annihilated, or in some cases totally annihilating the world, or totally annihilating the entire universe, and it's all their fault. It's called the cosmic guilt trip. Pretty big. So this overwhelming sense of fear can close us off from experiencing the fullness of that transcendent surrender. Yet, fear and anxiety are natural artifacts of the egoic consciousness. Listen to that sentence again. Fear and anxiety are natural artifacts of the egoic consciousness. Primarily, it comes from primal fear. Fear is an important emotion, right? If you're being chased by a tiger, that fear is going to make you run a lot faster. But a lot of fear that's generated these days is, essentially what's called false evidence appearing real, right? It's the fear that's generated from within us by the anxiety created from living in this culture that is cutting us off from natural ways of being. Please don't take away my Amazon Prime, though. And the ego may simply be attempting to effectively protect itself, to avoid facing something that needs to be addressed, or to distract the participant from facing or experiencing the ultimate truth. And that ultimate truth is that we are not our ego. And so, again, it can be a past trauma that we've been holding on to and are re-experiencing through the entheogenic experience. A skilled practitioner can assist, coach, and guide individuals through this anxiety simply through their way of being, with their words and by their actions, and with that establishment of trust, sometimes subtly with touch, song, or any number of ancient or modern techniques that can allow the participant to just feel safe. In the ayahuasca experience, a skilled shaman using Icaros can totally just have fear dissolve away in the person that may be really facing their darkest demons. Likely, the best way to address fear is to accept and fully surrender into it, to embrace it, to make fear your lover. Or as my good friend Dreamy Bear Baraka Kanan says, this is the place we come to French kiss our fear. I like that one. And it has also been said that courage does not exist in the absence of fear. So developing a courageous sense of being is to face our fears, our demons, by relaxing and breathing deeply into them. Ego death can be a reality within the 5-MeO experience. And learning to let go of the egoic structure can take practice in order to fully experience ego transcendence. So if you're doing 5-MeO for the first time, you may not experience full ego transcendence. There may be some resistance that needs to be loosened up, maybe over a couple of experiences. Now, something certain practitioners do is they'll start with a smaller dose within that setting. It's what they commonly refer to as a handshake dose. And they'll usually give somewhere in between 5 and 7 milligrams of synthetic 5-MeO-DMT. If people then have some more experience, then they can experience what's called the hug dose, which is usually somewhere between 8 and 10 milligrams of the medicine. And then they'll kind of build up and then give somebody what they call the full embrace of the 11 to 13 plus milligram experience. So that's one way of kind of leading up and disseminating fear. And yet that can also be counterproductive, because you can give somebody a small dose of 5-MeO-DMT and they'll go like, okay, yeah, don't want to go there. No, thank you, got it. We're just gonna we'll just take that. So there are different approaches, right? Okay, we did that one. Ego death can be a reality within the 5-MeO experience. And okay, I got that. Practitioners should be ready and able to offer advice, counsel, coaching, and support to effectively acknowledge and address fear before, during, and even well after the initiation. So, and that's the thing, the one word I have seen uttered in 5-MeO-DMT sessions that just alarms the hell out of me is, it's okay. Because something that someone is experiencing may be anything but okay. But if they're experiencing fear, one thing that I've seen utilized that is masterful is saying, you're safe. Because that's where the fear is arising from, is for somehow not feeling safe. So if you can let the person know that it's okay it is safe to be afraid, and it is safe to feel afraid, can really assist people in moving through that. So these are just a few recommendations and techniques to assist in the process of surrendering fully and letting go into the entheogenic experience and accepting who and what we truly are, which is the infinite and eternal source of all existence and creation embodied in flesh, remembering and awakening into the fullness of the one. So one thing I want to look at quickly, since we still have plenty of time, do we not?
Yeah, about 5-10 more minutes.
5 or 10 more minutes. So people interested in looking at the latest Johns Hopkins research on 5-MeO? It's pretty cool. Johns Hopkins is more well known for the psilocybin work that has been done with Roland Griffith, Mary Cosimano, Matt Johnson, and essentially the Johns Hopkins team. But more recently, our good friend Alan Cooey Davis, along with our friends Joseph, was that a dog or a chair? That was good. Our good friends Alan Cooey Davis and Joseph Persuglia have been doing a lot of exploration into looking at 5-MeO-DMT in certain populations. So a couple of years ago in 2017, they did an anonymous online survey. And the first one that really came out was, you can't see it there, but that's the full abstract and poster presentation, which was entitled "The Influence of Set and Setting on the Acute Subjective Effects of 5-MeO-DMT." And Andy Cepeda was the coordinator. I don't know L.Y. Doyle or J.M. Clifton, but Joseph Persuglia has contributed a lot to this. Rafael Lancelota as well, Roland Griffiths, and then my good friend Alan Cooey Davis, who is just an amazing researcher. And so essentially, just to go over the detail, 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine is a psychoactive indole alkylamine substance found in several plants and in high concentrations in the bufo alvarius toad. 5-MeO-DMT is also synthetically produced and elicits strong hallucinogenic, I would call them entheogenic, effects with a rapid onset and short duration of action, usually about 35 to 40 minutes. 5-MeO-DMT has been used in various contexts, including recreational, at home, music festivals, not really recommended, and sacramental, e.g. shamanic ritual settings. Research has shown that the set and setting of a psychedelic experience are critical factors associated with acute effects. And that was primarily through the Johns Hopkins psilocybin research that they had done. Anecdotal evidence suggests the same may be true for 5-MeO-DMT. However, we could find no empirical support for this assertion. Therefore, we sought to examine the influence of set and setting on the acute and persisting effects of 5-MeO-DMT. So the aim of the study is to examine the influence of set and setting on the subjective effects of synthetic, specifically synthetic 5-MeO-DMT, by comparing individuals who have used 5-MeO-DMT in two separate settings. One, in the general population. So that could mean that people just got it and did some on their own at home. There may have been a practitioner involved in some way, shape, or form. It's really not necessarily defined. And secondly, in a structured group setting within the United States. So we understand that this is an underground group that has very, very specific protocols, let's call it that, for pre-framing people, for the administration of this sacrament, for holding space, as well as providing integrative support after the fact. So, using an internet-based advertisement, they recruited these two samples of English-speaking adults to complete an anonymous web-based survey. Sample 1 included anyone reporting synthetic 5-MeO use in their lifetime. Sample 2 included members of a specific underground group who used 5-MeO-DMT in structured settings within the United States. This group guides the dose and administration of 5-MeO-DMT and the preparation of and support during and following sessions, which are similar to procedures used in laboratory studies with psychedelics, primarily Johns Hopkins' own studies. Measures included frequency of use, measuring the mystical experience itself, challenging experiences, persisting effects, set and setting variables. And then finally, they conducted frequency counts of descriptive analysis of study variables. They compared proportions of samples endorsing variables using chi-square analysis, which I have no idea what that is at all, and compared mean ratings of subjective effects of 5-MeO-DMT using t-tests. I would probably ask Jack to explain what t-tests are, but I'm not going to go there right now. So here's the sample. This is the interesting one. So it was a total of 646 people completed that online study. So in the sample of the general population, 284 people. The mean age of the participant was 34 years old, 88% male. So the male population in the general pop was much higher, only 22% female. 88% white Caucasian folks, so it's pretty white. And 80% heterosexual. Okay, so that's good. We had 20% who were gay. Now in the structured group, it was larger, 362 people. The mean age was 48, considerably older, 14 years older as a matter of fact. 55% male, which made it almost equal masculine feminine. Again, little less white and slightly more gay. 1%, you know? But the statistics in the proportional analysis was interesting because in the general population of that 284 people, which you can see there, only 50% said they achieved what they were calling the complete mystical experience, while in the structured group, it was 83.4%, which is pretty amazing and important. And the amazing finding is, again, we talked about those statistics. The real significant findings are in the results pertaining to responses given concerning what the study refers to as the complete mystical experience. The general population group showed a fairly significant number. 50% is pretty high. To have something that can deliver a full, complete nirvikalpa samadhi experience in 50% of people that do it, that's pretty good. However, in the structured temple group came in significantly higher than that at an astounding 83.4%, over 33% higher, which clearly demonstrates the general format that they are utilizing in terms of pre-framing and preparing individuals for the experience, how they are co-creating what is referred to as a safe, solid, and sacred container for their ceremony, the methods they're utilizing in administering the sacrament and holding space for individuals within the experience itself, as well as the materials, techniques, and support offered by the organization for integration and follow-up is having a significant impact on the positive results of the experience by the initiate members over the unregulated general population group. And drilling down into the details, this includes significantly higher overall positive effects of the acute mystical experience, significantly lower challenging effects, so the need for less harm reduction, significantly longer positive persisting effects, and a lower frequency of use overall in the structured group. And it gets more interesting. So here's the mean rating scale. So you can see that anywhere that you see the 3 asterisks means that it was statistically far higher than what they were seeing in the unregulated group. So much higher in terms of related mysticism, positive mood, transcendence of space and time, and ineffability, which are all the things they put in to gauging this acute mystical experience. And then in the intensity of the acute challenging experience, again, all of the 3 asterisk points were statistically lower in terms of isolation, fear. Now the interesting thing is in grief, that people in the structured group were able to feel and express more grief, which I actually look at as a good thing. Physical distress, clearly lower. A sense of insanity, far lower. Death, death was up there, that was good. But then if you look at paranoia is, low, but it's significant, and it's almost non-existent in the structured group, primarily because of that pre-framing and how things were being held. Let's see. In his amazing, outstanding presentation titled The Variations of the 5-MeO-DMT Experience Considerations for the Future, presented at the recent WBAC event, the World Bufo Alvarez Conference in Mexico City, Joseph Berserglia, who's one of the key researchers on this study, offered a detailed comparison of varied group samples reporting on the complete mystical experience, which not only included 2 groups from this study, but also included statistics reported from their previous 5-MeO studies done at Johns Hopkins, within the general population with primarily toad bufotoxin, just so everybody knows, as well as the well-known Johns Hopkins psilocybin research and Dr. Berserglia's own research from a survey of bufo recipients from the Crossroads Recovery Clinic in Mexico, where 5-MeO-DMT was used generally after sessions with ibogaine. This particular chart clearly indicates that the results from the structured group rank significantly higher than any research previously conducted, and with a sample group that is significantly larger than any others within this comparison, and possibly on record. And so that is this chart that is this chart right here. So what you can see on the bottom is the synthetic use in the general population that we talked about, hitting at 50%. In Johns Hopkins, moderate to high dose psilocybin with 18 individuals, they were able to reach 53%. In their high dose psilocybin, they had got to their 67%, which is a number that was really considered to be off the charts at that time when that research came out. Then the toad 5-MeO epidemiology, that was with people who were doing toad bufotoxin either in unregulated or possibly regulated settings, but not necessarily full regulated settings. The Crossroads report, they were able to get it up to 75% using the toad bufotoxin, but in the structured Temple group, with 362 people, they got it up to 83.4%, which is really, really significantly high. One of the other things that came out really quickly that I want to go into, the latest report is the cognitive effects of 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine that are associated with improvements in depression and anxiety. This is really, really significant data. They basically took that same structured group and they began to ask if people had either been clinically diagnosed with depression and anxiety or self-diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And that's what essentially the aim of the study set to look at. I'm kind of going fast so we can get to the Q&A. So again, they used that email distribution list. They got those 362 people to respond. They were looking at, if you look at the bottom, depression and anxiety measures, mystical experience questionnaire, challenging experiences questionnaire, and persisting effects questionnaire were included. Here's again the sample. Check out these numbers. Rates of anxiety, 173 people out of that 362 said that they had anxiety. It improved 79% from 1 to 2 sessions. That's incredible. The rates of depression, almost half said that they had some form of depression, improved at 81%. So the conclusion there is when administered in a naturalistic group setting, 5-MeO appears to be associated with spontaneous and unintended improvement, right? That the intention of this group was not to improve depression and anxiety, it was to induce the nirvikalpa samadhi experience. But what they're finding is an 80% reduction in both depression and anxiety, which is almost unheard of. So, yeah. So that's letting go. Hopefully some of those techniques were helpful. And now I'd like to open it up for Q&A. So this part is now called Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About 5-MeO DMT, hi Nanea, but we're afraid to ask. So be not afraid. Yeah, please.
Have you noticed a difference in the size of the group and how people respond?
So
bigger groups or smaller groups react differently?
okay, so the question is, and I'm repeating this for camera, is does the differentiation in the size of group, or has there been any comparative analysis in terms of size of group? So there hasn't been any statistical analysis that I'm aware of. However, so I would say yes, there is quite a bit of difference. First, when you're working one-on-one with a practitioner, it requires less surrender and it requires less trust because it's just you and them. When you're working in a small circle of people, let's call it 5 or 6, and you don't know those people at all, the trust that you have to build up in order to really surrender is even bigger. And so when you can, there is a greater depth and ability to surrender and trust when you're out in the world, you know, with people that you don't know, because that's been able to have been held for you in a very, very intimate way. There are other practices that I have heard of group experiences where anywhere from 10 to 13 people can do 5-MeO DMT together in what could be described as a more tantric environment. Now, when I say tantric, I don't mean sexual environment. I'm talking about the ability to come into a unitive experience with another being. So some practitioners will work with couples to actually allow them to bring themselves into a unified place within their relatedness, under the, within the consciousness expansion of that 5-MeO-DMT experience. So I will hold that there is great value in the group experience, and that it is a great way to experience this medicine for the first time that requires more trust and more vulnerability on the part of the individual. And then after they've done that a few times, then they can go into doing more one-on-one work. There are practitioners who will only work in a one-on-one context. I kind of feel that that could be dangerous because you never know what the presentment is like. Martin Ball put on his podcast a couple of years ago that he had had 2 brothers come to work with him who were bodybuilders. And he took one upstairs and they went into the experience and they started seeing demons coming out of the vents of the air conditioning. And Martin said something and suddenly the guy brought his attention to Martin and Martin became the demon. And so the guy proceeded to kind of, rough him up pretty good. And so I always have some concern about people who work one-on-one with the medicine because you never know what that presentment is going to be. And someone can present really, really calmly on one occasion and then be very, very kinetic on another. So when you're working on a one-on-one setting, unless you have like a helper, things can potentially get out of hand. So, but once somebody kind of establishes a practice where you can see what the presentment is and how it manifests, it's much more likely that you're not going to have any issues and you can do deeper one-on-one work with those folks. And that those folks can then relax and surrender into the experience, and so they can maintain. So in the yogic literature, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, I'm preaching to the choir over here to Joel, once the individual yogin attains to the somatic experience, that's not the end, that's the beginning. Because then it talks about developing what's called samyama. Sam, again, is with. Yama loosely can be defined as control, but I don't like the term control. I like to refer to it as poise. So it's about being poised in the entheogenic or somatic experience. One of the things that can then get cultivated is the ability to stay focused, what the yogins call dharana, and open, what they call dhyana, right? And this process of being focused and open is what I have heard referred to as being focus opus. And so developing this sense of being completely focus opus is a great way. It's really being fully surrendered and yet completely aware, and can lead to the ability to be able to actually navigate while you are in the non-dual state. So that help? That answer that? I had one over here, gentleman right here.
The experience of ego death.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to understand the relationship between ego and selfishness. And I'm asking for a friend, of course, but whether after the effect, assuming setting proper post-session integration, do people change in a way that appears to make a marked difference in a reduction in what others would call selfishness?
Great question. So let me see if I can restate that for the audio. So the question is, does the effect of 5-MeO have a long-term or a longer-lasting effect for ego reduction and less selfishness within the individual? Yes and no. I would say that the dissolution of ego can actually cause a snapback that can actually lead to ego inflation in certain individuals. And so ego inflation needs to really, really be watched out for. And that is usually due, I have found, to overuse of the medicine. And once you've experienced yourself as God, that's like really big. And so to be able to then kind of bring that all back into your human reality and, you know, walk, and I use the term carefully, humbly, in the world, can be a bit of a challenge. And yet, I have witnessed in many the sense of recognizing, oh my God, I really am the infinite source of all existence and creation. And I don't need to strive to keep looking for that anymore because I know it exists here. That's freeing up a lot of fucking time to do other things. I don't have to be chasing after my spirituality. I can now watch Narcos, you know, or something more positive, you know, in my life. So it can lead definitely to a softening of the egoic structure and a relaxing into life more. And I've seen that in a number of individuals who have participated in the 5-MeO experience, that, you know, they come in and they're just like really tight. And after doing the experience, often only once, just start relaxing into life more and really are able to carry themselves in a much more centered and harmonious way. Did that answer the question sufficiently? Leroy.
Do you have a preference between toad medicine and synthetic?
Do I have a preference? Well, who is this I you're speaking of first? Do I have a preference between bufotoxin and synthetic 5-MeO-DMT? Well, you know, having never really done this medicine myself, joking, I would say that I actually have done both, and I've done varieties of both. In terms of synthetic, I've also worked with plant extracts, including Varola theodora and Phalaris grass. Each one has their own particular unique quality. It's like having the same kind of wine from different vineyards. The reason that I don't prefer myself working with the toad bufotoxin is because I don't think those toads should be encumbered upon. I think they got enough trouble. Yeah, and I have particular kind of feelings about that. And however, I believe that if somebody is using a synthetic, that synthetic should be lab tested before given to anyone to be sure that it doesn't contain any toxic components. And it should be bioassayed by at least the practitioner and several other people before it's being offered to anybody. And I don't know too many practitioners who are actually doing that, unfortunately. And it's definitely something that should be done. So having done kind of this vast array, again, I would say they all have these subtle differences, but you know, I would say I would prefer synthetic over the bufotoxin myself. I can't speak for others. Leroy.
Yeah. Compare and contrast with LSD, because so much of this sounds familiar.
Sure. Sure. Well,
possibly because it's the same general place.
Yes and no. No, not so much. So James Orrock points out very clearly that, you know, LSD microgram for microgram is actually stronger. Would you agree with that, Jack?
Yeah, this is what we discussed on stage. Yeah. That's what I said, actually.
Yeah. And so, but 5-MeO does something that LSD just does not do. Unless you're taking really, really high doses of LSD that can actually lead to the ego transcendence point, when you're doing 5-MeO, it's just like so clear. I mean, even Stanislav Grof, and if there's anybody who knows about LSD, it's Stan Grof, says very, very clearly that the 5-MeO-DMT experience is beyond anything that he has ever encountered. So, you know, I have not found there to be really any comparison. But then again, I actually consider myself kind of a lightweight. You know, I don't like long-acting psychedelic experiences because who the fuck has 8 hours to like take a fucking psychedelic? If you do, God bless you. You know, 5-MeO-DMT, you know, has been referred to as spiritual efficiency because it is so fast acting. It is immediate. And there's no like going like, okay, am I feeling it yet? You know, there's none of that. It is like I described my first experience as a nuclear cannon shot backwards down the wormhole into the screaming void that is the heart of God. I've never had that on LSD. Now, maybe I should be taking more LSD. I don't know. But, you know, and I want to give LSD its due because it is certainly very effective in opening people and bringing people into those higher states of unitive experience. But this is of a class that is just in its own stratosphere, let's call it that. So really no, in my personal experience, I would say no comparison. When people ask me to describe, you know, what's the difference? I say, well, take every psychedelic experience that you've ever had previously, place that on the head of a pin. This is the fucking universe. You know, it's that big. Some people go, oh, it's 4 times stronger. It's 8 times. It is infinitely more powerful than NN-DMT, for example, which is its cousin that's primarily found in ayahuasca brews. Even good, strong street DMT is a visionary experience, right? So the visionary realm is, you know, you're a Kabbalist, you know these things. You know, in the Hermetic Kabbalah, which I've been studying for decades, they talk about 4 levels of consciousness. At the highest vibrational rate of frequency is what they call Atsalut. It translates out as the absolute, pure, undifferentiated source consciousness, vibrating at the highest frequency possible, commonly known as the Godhead, what I referred to earlier as the ultimate reality. Below that, as that pure frequency of source kind of slows down, which is a process that Kabbalists called emanationism, it then gave rise to what they call Bria, creative or archetypal consciousness, beyond concept, beyond form, beyond imagination. It's where the entire Hebrew concept of archangels come from that exists just below that pure vibrational frequency of source. Ancient Greeks called them the archons, or the ancient ones, and it can be considered as the architecture or framework from which the rest of the manifest universe is kind of framed or suspended. I had an astrophysicist, when I was talking about this, say, that sounds like our concepts of dark energy and dark matter. We've never been able to measure it. We know it exists by how it's affecting galactic shift, but we're pretty convinced it makes up about 95% of the universe and is framing the 5% of physical matter and energy we can actually measure. I said, that's a great concept for archetypal reality. I'm stealing it and sharing it with you here. And then as that archetypal consciousness slowed down, it then gave rise to what the Kabbalists call Yetzirah, which means formative consciousness, what we call the divine imagination. Anything that can be thought within the mind of God, subsequently reflected down into our own human imaginations. It is known as the visionary realms, the spirit realms, the dream realms, the astral realms. And its language, according to Jung, is image and structure and number and color and geometry. When we go into states of virtual reality, we are encountering essentially a physical manifestation of these astral realms. And we can attune our consciousness using those kinds of tools. And then as that visionary frequency slows down, it then gave rise to manifest physical reality, what the Kabbalists called Asiya, the world of material existence. And so what I believe is, you know, here we are sitting in the world of material existence. We take an entheogen like 5-MeO-DMT and it rockets us straight into the absolute consciousness. You're taking LSD, it's taking you into high levels of visionary consciousness merging into archetypal consciousness. 5-MeO takes you directly into what I call a kether shot. Kether is the crown in Hebrew Kabbalah. It is the unitive oneness. And then as the vibrational frequency of the medicine, the energetic slows down, you pass through those archetypal realms and get what is commonly called downloads. You know, it's like when Keanu Reeves in The Matrix goes, I know Kung Fu. You know, it's suddenly there's this huge download of deep knowing, and you have touched the collective unconscious, because the collective unconscious exists in that archetypal realm. And then you can pass through a very, very short visionary realm, which is usually fractal holographic patterning and geometry unfolding, and then boom, back into the physical body, feeling deep Sat Chitananda, being, consciousness, and bliss in this orgasmic sense of just absolute and total ahava, total love and echud, unity. Question did that answer your question? Probably more than you ever thought.
Probably, well, I mean, it's just that so much of what you're saying is just extremely familiar in those terms. So,
Yes. Well, I would, suggest that at some point you might want to find a practitioner who does these things and see what happens. Yeah, there you go. Question in the back.
Last question, and then also give us some tips about integration.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I almost was not going to ask this after his question because I didn't want to be like, well, is it like this? But then you started talking about like the levels. And what you're saying reminds me a lot of where you can go really deeply on ketamine, like past the archetypes and into something else.
Mm-hmm.
And is it just that it is like a more intense or a faster version of that, or?
I've never done ketamine really. Technically I have, but I wouldn't say that it was an experience that came anywhere close to what 5-MeO-DMT does. Perhaps I need to do more. But I would say that these different sacraments, so the question is, can you get through deeper layers? I am certain that different sacraments, different practices can take us to more rarefied levels of consciousness. Not being very familiar with ketamine, it's difficult for me to share that. But one example I can give is that after I had my first 5-MeO-DMT experience, I became like a somewhat of what's the term I'm looking for? Talk about like brain going offline there for a second. I became kind of an evangelist. I wanted to tell everybody about it. And then people would come and say, well, that sounds like Salvia Divinorum. And I'm, Salvia Divinorum, what's that? Oh, you can get it down at the head shop. You can do something that does that at the head shop? So I was like beelining for the head shop. And sure enough, I got some 20 times potency Salvia Divinorum. And I had a friend come and sit with me. And I put some in a little bubbler bong. And I lit it up. And I took a big hit. And I went, oh yeah, that kind of feels like boom. It didn't feel anything. It was like a threshing combine cutting through my consciousness, slicing me into little pieces. And then I slid into different things and they got smeared across the floor and through the wall and into my front walkway. And then suddenly I was looking up and there was this rectangular space of light and I was descending into darkness. I was in a grave and I was being lowered into this grave and I'm all, oh fuck, I killed myself. And then there was this like cloudy images of people standing and I was going, oh, that's my family. And they're really bummed out that I killed myself. Please, don't ever let me do that again. And then I like went through some like, chthonic underworld wormholes and ended up in this place that I called the clownery. And then I like came out and I was going like, that was definitely not 5-MeO-DMT. But it was something. Not really something I want to do again, but it was something. So yeah, you can get to different levels. But to my knowledge, 5-MeO-DMT, very different than the ketamine experience. Cherie wants me to talk about the integration, which is usually my holding space talk, but I'll talk about integration because integration, especially with 5-MeO-DMT, could not be more important, right? And so what is integration really? Integration is about taking these dynamic peak experiences and then into like literally moving into our lives from this great space of opening for the betterment of ourselves and those around us. So it's really easy to chase after this experience or other experiences and do ayahuasca every week, especially here where there's like 60 ayahuasca circles going on anywhere over the Southern California area. Or, do 5-MeO-DMT, again and again and again. But if you're not taking the lessons, the downloads, the heart openings that are coming from this experience and really applying them to your life in a practical way, you just kind of, you're missing the point. And so integration can show up in a lot of different ways. I would say that, to my knowledge, about 90% of people who do 5-MeO-DMT integrate the experience seamlessly into their lives. If they come in with stress and anxiety, it kind of vanishes in a particular way. Yet, there is another 15 to 20%, let's say, of individuals that do it who can struggle with the experience. They may not have that full release experience. They may go into experiencing shadow or past trauma that's coming up, and then they need assistance in being able to process, this trauma that had been shoved down into the psychosomatic body. This sacrament, and I call it a sacrament because it is a sacred substance. It is a mediator, a medicina that goes down into the psychosomatic body, and it finds these kinks that are down in there, and it starts unwinding them. And so when somebody comes out of that 5-MeO-DMT experience, they're hearts are blasted open. They can be really, really super raw, and they need to be able to have effective grounding techniques. So how many people here are familiar with the secret organization known as the Conclave? Aha, that's good, not too many. Well, I suggest you go online and look them up because they have some really, really great things, including integration and suggested techniques for grounding. So let me go over a couple of these because these are really good. Helpful things to consider trying. So let me read this really quick because this is great stuff. The following are some general recommendations that we have found useful in assisting new initiates to effectively ground themselves and integrate their experience into their lives. Some of these recommendations may prove more effective than others. We invite you to explore them and to discover what works best for you. Also, should you discover specific techniques or practices that you find particularly useful in your integration process, we invite you to share those with the members of the conclave in order to benefit the wider entheogenic community. The 5-MeO-DMT experience is extremely powerful and profound. Most find that the experience easily integrates into their lives and organically unfolds over the next several days, weeks, and in some cases, months after their participation, offering unique insights and deeper understandings about the self, the nature of the universe, the divine, and the interrelatedness and ultimate unity of these aspects of the all. In some cases, certain challenges may arise in the process, including an extended period of reactivation. Reactivation is not uncommon with 5-MeO-DMT. Some people call it flashbacks. I don't believe that's the correct terminology because I believe that what is actually going on, even though Jack argues with me frequently, is that you are experiencing an endogenous release of 5-MeO-DMT that is taking you back into state. 5-MeO-DMT and melatonin are very close in terms of their actual structure as a molecule. Some say that 5-MeO-DMT may be produced in the pineal gland. Rick Strassman presents that completely speculative. They don't know. It could be also lungs and other areas that it may be created in. We don't know. But we do know that it exists endogenously in the body. And the theory is that when one triggers that it can automatically start triggering it. And we have seen it happen in people. Again, the general rule of thumb, do not resist. Surrender and remember to breathe. And so let me look at this really quick. Where did I stop? What's that? Oh, we need to conclude? So let me give you a couple of tips. Acupuncture, energetic body work and massage, hot and cold bathing, grounding foods, root vegetables, grains, salt, good red meat, dairy products, a good cheeseburger and french fries. No kidding. Yoga and breath work, rigorous physical exercises, touch and just being held by somebody and allowed to fully express. Ask someone to just hold space and listen. Herbal sleep remedies and supplements, time off from your regular routine and taking time to connect in with nature. Often, coaching and counseling can be really, really supportive in bringing that back in. Sometimes things will arise up, like past traumas that may need psychotherapy in some way to really ground those things that were stirred up. We generally recommend, it is generally recommended that people stay off of sedatives and anti-anxiety medication, even if they are experiencing those. And then some things that they say to consider avoiding. So even though standard meditational practices are highly recommended in integration, they really serve to rarefy the consciousness. If you're having profound reactivations afterwards, you may want to consider laying off the meditative practice for a little while until that grounds in. You want to be careful, one second, with stimulants and other drugs, especially other psychoactives, can really, really kick in powerfully. Cannabis, nicotine, chocolate, caffeine, other psychedelics can really kick in reactivations, and you've got to be careful with that. And then the last one is you want to really stay away from obsessing and pathologizing that this thing's never going to end. Quick question?
No.
Nope, we don't have time.
Afterwards, we really out of time.
And I have some copies of some of the conclave material that I'm happy to share with people if they want to take it. Thanks, Cherie.
Thank you.